The aerobic plyometric method we're going to cover now is a great method to help decrease the risk of soft tissue injuries, particularly in team sports or sports where there's a lot of running. Now, if you've been around sports long enough, you'd know that the preseason and the early parts of the season are where you see a ton of lower body soft tissue injuries. And the reason for that is largely simply because there's too big of a transition between the off-season, the preseason, and the season itself, and there's not enough gradual increase in the stress that the lower body has to be exposed to. So aerobic plyometrics is a great way, or it's a great method, I should say, to help improve the elasticity and the durability of the lower body tissue. So the ankle, the knee, the hip, the whole complex needs to gradually be increased to more and more stress over time. And that means we need to gradually increase how much work that area of the body has been exposed to. Now, aerobic plyometrics are a bit different than your standard plyometrics because most people think of plyometrics as a way purely to develop explosiveness. And while that's the case, we can also use the similar sort of methodology, but done a bit differently in order to increase endurance and increase pliability and increase essentially the capacity of the lower extremities to be able to sustain stress loads over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a low to moderate hurdle height. So again, most people in a plyometric, true plyometric or more standard plyometric would use the biggest hurdles possible and they would have the biggest, most explosive jumps possible. In this case, in the aerobic plyometric phase, what we're doing is using the lower or more moderate aerobic or more moderate height of the hurdle, but we're doing these jumps over much longer periods of time. A standard, high intensity type plyometric would be, 3 to 6 jumps maybe at max. What we're going to shoot for is 8 to even up to 15 jumps, and we're going to only have a very short work period in between, but the jumps are sub-maximal. So what we're looking for here is good jumping technique. So again, we want to see the hips and everything aligned properly. We want to see eyes straight ahead. We want to see just good overall jump mechanics, and we want to see minimal ground contact time. So we want to see Mike get off the ground quickly, but be very smooth and very fluid. So another thing this really develops is the elastic component that's so important in explosive power and in being able to repeat yourself over and over again, because if the energy can be transferred effectively elastically, then essentially the muscles and the other energy-intensive tissues have to do less of the work. So part of what this method is doing is training that fascial network and those tendons to be much better at absorbing and utilizing that elastic energy. So what we're going to do typically, like I said, we're going to start out on the lower end of what I talked about, so maybe 8 to 10 hurdles, and then as the athlete progresses, we're going to start increasing how many hurdles they can go through, and we're going to start increasing the height of the hurdle as well. Typically, we want to start out around a 3 to 5 minute period and work all the way up 10, 12 minutes as we get closer to the season, sometimes even longer than that. But what we're going for, again, is fluidity of movement, is seeing that they can get off the ground quickly and be very fluid and elastic in their movement. If they're very stiff and they're very rigid, then that's the type of athlete, when they go out in the field to perform, you're going to see hamstring problems, you're going to see ankle problems, knee problems, you're going to see all these things happen because they don't have that elastic fluidity of the lower body complex as a whole. So we're going to go ahead and have them start back here. And again, what we're going to coach them on is minimal ground contact time. So we want to coach them to think of the ground as a trampoline and get off the trampoline as quickly and smoothly as they can. We're looking to see, can they coordinate their upper body and their lower body, and we're looking at how well can they maintain that over time. So he's going to be smooth, elastic, he's going to walk through or jump through the hurdles, and then we're looking at a 10 to 30 second rest interval typically. Because there's shorter number of hurdles here, we're going to keep it more on the 10-second range, 12-second range. So he's simply going to progress through the hurdles, slowly walk back to the beginning, and then he's going to hop back through them again. So we'll have him just do, let's say, 10 of these to demonstrate. Keeping in mind we want to go 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and even longer as we progress through the off season and getting up to the preseason. So go ahead. Good. Okay, walk back. And again, we really shouldn't hear a hard landing. We should see nice, smooth, fluid movements. We should see that he's absorbing the energy and able to recoil and propel himself forward with minimal effort possible. Okay. And we also see a little rhythm work too. So we want to see his rhythm was off there a little bit. We want to see that body awareness, that control, that kinesthetic awareness. And again, that's something else that can be developed here as well. So let's do a few more. Good. And it's also good as the athletes progress, you can start changing the hurdle distances. So some hurdles can be closer together, some hurdles can be farther apart. They don't have to be completely uniform because again, when you're producing power in the real world, uniformity doesn't exist. Okay, there's lots of different ranges of motion, there's lots of different distances. This idea of everything being symmetrical and uniform, it just doesn't happen in the real world. So go ahead. Good. Let's do a couple more. So again, what we want to see is just that smooth, fluid motion. We're seeing them start to, towards the end, hit a little bit harder than we'd like to see. So again, we want to remind them to hit the ground smooth and fluid, and we want to think of like a trampoline rebound, but we don't want to hit the trampoline. We want to bounce off the trampoline. Okay, go ahead. Good. Okay, let's walk back. We'll just do a couple more. And again, this exercise or this method, it shouldn't be fatiguing. Okay, you shouldn't see their form suffer, because you should give them enough rest, 10, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever the case may be, depending on how far they're going. The rest should be sufficient that they're able to maintain good technique throughout. Okay, go ahead. Good. Let's do one more. Now, one thing I noticed, and you'll see this a lot of athletes, is they tend to look down because they want to see where the hurdle is. Well, the reality is, sports happen up here. You need to teach them how to see through their peripheral vision and be focused on what's around them rather than looking down as they're jumping and moving around. So with him, one thing we're going to focus on for a good cue here is to focus on looking through the garage door, which is behind us, and having his vision be focused there rather than down at the hurdles as he's jumping through. He should start to be able to sense the right jump distance and where the hurdles are just based on overall kinesthetic awareness. Let's go ahead and do one more. Good. So you notice the difference there? All right, so do one more time, just focus on that same thing. So again, I saw a concerted difference in his head positioning, in his eyes, as I had him focus on looking through the door in front of him rather than letting him just look down at his feet. That's going to put him in a bad position. That's not going to teach good habits for a real world application, and it's not going to be what we're looking for. So last one. Good. Okay, so as you can see, he shouldn't be out of breath. This shouldn't be an extremely fatiguing method. It's one you can also basically incorporate into a warm-up if you want to. So you can do 3 to 5 minutes of these types of jumps in your dynamic warm-up period, because again, it's going to help warm up the lower body tissues and build stress tolerance to those areas. So as soon as we can see him start to do that, 3 to 5 minutes consistently, his technique looks good, his position looks good, his jumping looks smooth and fluid, then we can start to increase how many jumps he's doing. We can gradually start to decrease the rest intervals. We can make it more complex. So like I said, we can start to have him do lateral hops. We could have him start doing different lengths hops. We could change up the hurdle widths in between them. We can start doing all sorts of things to make it more challenging. We could do single leg hops. We could do all that sort of stuff. But the key here is that as we progress from the off season to the preseason to the in season, we should see this being done more and more frequently, because the problem is a lot of times athletes are only sprinting or doing their running drills maybe 2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week leading up to a camp, and then all of a sudden they're in a camp and they're sprinting 5, 6 days a week. You can't expect the body to respond well when you double the amount of volume and double the amount of stress. Essentially, it's on the tissues. So these sorts of activities, the aerobic plyos, even if they're only done for 3 to 5 minutes a day in small amounts if necessary, and maybe 2 or 3 days a week in higher amounts, that frequency of exposure to this sort of movements are going to help prepare the lower body for the stress of the sport, the stress of competition, the stress of training for the competition. So typically, you want to start incorporating this into your warm-up or your cool-down or just into your training program, 6, 8, even 10 or 12 weeks away from a preseason training camp. Gradually increase how frequently they're doing it, gradually increase the hurdle height, gradually increase the length and the number of bounds they're doing, gradually increase the complexity. Because again, you want them to be exposed to all these different movements, to all these different patterns, and you want their lower body to have been exposed to the frequency necessary to prepare them, so when they get out there in the competition field, they get out there wherever it is their training camp is, their lower body tissues have been conditioned to handle the stress, and they've developed that elastic component that's going to make them faster, more explosive, and more resilient over the course of the season. So this is a method I really think needs to be utilized more, because I think there's too many issues with lower body injuries that could be prevented, and this sort of repetitive low to moderate intensity movements done over longer periods of time is a great way to improve them. So again, this is aerobic plyometrics. I highly recommend incorporating these in as you progress closer to a season. They'll make your athletes more explosive, more dynamic, and most importantly, they'll help prevent injuries, which are going to keep them sidelined. So that's aerobic plyometrics.